I don't have, the ability, like I'm not a pianist, so I can't just sit down at a piano or a MIDI keyboard and wire it up to, my workstation and then play the chord and then the next chord, and the next chord and that chord. I can't even do that. The way I work on songs from start to finish in their entirety are like always in little pieces here and there. It just doesn't go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. What happens is I'll draw a root note, and then another note, and then just have like the bass notes, right? And then I'll layer on, some counter melody notes with it, and then go from the last chord to the second chord to the first chord, then to the third chord, and then just keep juggling around until it's complete. You can go in here and then just start, plotting away your melody. So here's where you would either hook up a MIDI controller and go in and, play the notes that you know how to play, or you could simply just draw them in. So there I've got a root set up. But I'm way out of sync here. So I'm just gonna dodge some stuff around. And then, I do this pretty quick now, but, before it was a little cumbersome using the mouse and keyboard and all that stuff. But it's just becoming familiar with your DAW and knowing that, oh, you want that up an octave. Well, I could sit here and then go up an octave. Well, or if, you know the shortcut, you just hit shift and then one of these arrows. Now you're just going in intervals. So it's really handy to, become super familiar with the tools that you're using, because, they're all designed to save time and do all this stuff. So, and then once I kind of have a bass structure set in, I'll change the patch here to something stupid. And then increase the polyphony on that. And then just start doing some... Or, that's not right. And then, so then that's how I kind of come up with my chord structures here. Oh, but then I want a major there. Sure, why not? And then drop that down a seventh. Oh, yeah. So I have 3 chords, right? No particular time or anything. I'm gonna shut that metronome off because it drives me crazy more often than not. Okay, so that's a kind of like this is how I would start a song. So there you have your kind of your root chord there. I wouldn't begin shaping any kind of sound or style out of it. I just... So I kind of like the way that those notes go together. So then it comes about phrasing, right? So what you actually can do, and this is what I find these most useful for, is going into like a sound library, like this Vengeance guys. This is all they do, is they shit out these music libraries or drum loop libraries. So they just stuff like that I just basically use as temporary metronomes, if you will. So actually, there's a lot of websites out there too, where like splice.com, that just have terabytes upon terabytes of libraries from different musicians and artists that go in and they create these loop libraries where you can go and download this or that. And so at the end of the day, you're going to get like stuff like this where I don't know what the fuck that is. And then it's, of course, you got to spend some time to go and find something that moderately works, but just for humor's sake, we'll use this. And what this is going to do is it's just going to keep a time for me. Okay, great, cool. sad part is it's half a track right there. Now, I use that loop not to, you know, print in my production because that's just lazy as hell. I mean, you can do that, and lots of people do, shockingly enough. But, you know, I'm just going to use that as just kind of a bed or a thing to hold time so I know where these chords are going to go. So I'm just going to kind of shift these out for a second, and then... Okay, so I know I want my first chord to go there, and then... And then the second chord there. And then, shit, I don't know. And then that's gonna get carried on to the end of those 4 bars. So you're like halfway done your theme right there. So I'm gonna consolidate that within the DAW. And you're gonna learn all these tricks within the DAW. So it's like, you know, oh, Control J, it basically takes like a whole thing and consolidates it into one big clip. Ableton, you'll find, is very like clip based. And then actually they all are more or less kind of clip based. So now I have this series of, you know, 4 bars here that's just doing that. Now it needs a resolve, or it doesn't. I don't know. I feel it should because that's just my taste. But okay, and then go down for the root just for a second half, and then we'll call it that. I mean, you could go to town on this and do the whole track, but let's go minor, I guess, because that's the fashionable thing to do. All right. See, that's my life right now, because if I could just play it, I'd play it, but I can't, so I have to draw it. Yeah. That's better. Sustain. Okay, cool, good enough. So there's a 8-bar loop. And then now that I've kind of got something in there, I'm just gonna mute that loop there because now I know where the timing sits at everything. Now alternately, you can just use anything just as long as you know where the thing is. And now you're setting tempo. Oh, well. Missed that note. Oh, my fucking, sorry. Sure, good enough. Now you can find kind of where your bass is gonna sit. That's what I see. So these are the root notes here, basically, meaning that these are all gonna get like, you know, either octave down or something for a bass line to follow or something like that. But this is just one synth. I guess what I would do is then kind of figure out where it should sit in what key so I can bring it down. Okay, yeah, sure. And then, you know, I'm just trying to find that low note, and that's something I do, you know, something that resonates well. And it's usually around like, you know, D, C to F kind of range of 1, which is pretty low note. Like, shit, I wish I knew that the frequency of that, whatever D sharp 1 is. It's just about extends my knowledge of audio frequency. But I don't know, it's maybe to me around like
80 hertz, 80, 90, which is like not quite sub, but it's still pretty low. Sub being the frequencies that you don't really hear but kind of feel. So if I pull another octave down on that and do what I was supposed to do before and increase the polyphony on this. You don't have to do this with most synths because this is actually not commercially available, but all synths do this. There you go. So now you got that sub note. Now, within this plugin, and this is like any synth, you're going to have things like, you know, frequency, resonance, and envelopes, and all these different little options like unison. Now, this is no different than that. It's just all the wires are already connected in here, and by, you know, switching options on and off and stuff like that is just like, you know, pulling a plug in and out of that thing. So this isn't really about synthesizing and making cool patches and engineering the sound. This is just more about music making, so, and the way I do it. So now another thing I want to do, if I want to break that up, because maybe there's a part where you know, you don't want this whole drone going on through the whole arrangement. There are a whole number of different ways to kind of switch it up, and one would be like using an arpeggiator. Again, every DAW would have one of these, and they're basic ones, and then there are like super more complicated ones, like another plugin we wrote called Cthulhu and stuff like that. But just for demonstration's sakes, an arpeggiator will take that whole idea there and it'll arpeggiate the notes. So now it's going to go through the phrase just note by note. And then, of course, different ways of doing that, like, you know, on 16th notes. And then once you, that's like one way to do it. And then, of course, you know, when you kind of, oh, okay, well, I like that pattern. I want to work with that, you know. So give it some envelope. And then change some of the parameters on that. This is just a quick and dirty way to do it. I don't know, and then it comes down to, you know, throwing other effects. Most DAWs come with like their own set of built-in plugins, like Ableton Live comes with like a ton of like effects and stuff. So here I've got a bit of reverb on it. I'm just gonna pitch it up a bit. But the point is that once you have this track structure and the melody all laid out and stuff like that, it's good to have it like, you know, in full format like that, and then drag it off as a clip so that you'll never lose the whole phrase, and can take it all sorts of different directions with, you know, your post processing. That's kind of how I start, and what I'll do is I'll just call this like, I don't know, idea mass. Spell. This is good practice. I don't normally do this, but I think everyone should do this, so I don't necessarily always practice what I preach. Okay, so now here's my like big bank of crap. Like I've just got all these clips and ideas and things. So whether this track gets finished or not, like for the sake of this, doesn't really matter. So here I got this folder called August 2017 and whatever. So I'm going to take this clip, and you can do this with Ableton, or you could do it with Cubase, whatever you want. Like, you can export this as MIDI data, and MIDI data is universally known throughout every DAW, right? But within Ableton, you don't necessarily have to do that because it has its own proprietary clip format, so you don't have to export MIDI or anything like that. So since we're only working in Ableton right now, I can take this and then drop it in here. So now I've got this thing called Idea Masterclass, right? So which is just that. And, you know, and whether this goes anywhere or not past this thing, I can actually open up, let me open up something I was working on the other night. And this is what really helps me in writing music, is if I get so stuck on an idea. It's the slowest, fastest computer you can buy. This one. fucking A. Well, no, it's got, this project had a ton of shit on it. Ah, there we go. Okay, so, okay, cool, like a drum pattern in there that I can probably solo out, maybe. Well, okay, so that's all like one big drum thing. Now, if I was so, get rid of all this shit. Oh, it's thinking. Okay, so I had this like, you know, drums from one track. I could just take my clip over, and this translates from every other DAW, and then I can just throw it in there. So now I have, and of course, then you start getting into, you know, things like compression and stuff like that. So just for demo's sake, because if you want to have that sit in there a little nicer, we'll just get a sidechain from one of my kicks. I don't know which one. Let's just try that one. That's better. All right. Okay, great. You know, and that's kind of what I mean by the potato head EDM thing, except for you can actually buy content like that and then just stitch it together and then call it your own, oddly enough. But I mean, I do it too, but I do it with all the content and clips that I've made. Now, I literally shat that out without even thinking about it, because I know in my head certain notes resonate together nice and certain notes don't. But if you can't distinguish between what works and what doesn't, like I said, all the amount of gear and stuff or whatever is not going to help your case. So I don't know. I think I've just been fortunate to train myself in listening to music enough to know, you know, what sounds good and what doesn't, not in terms of the whole phrase, but what notes go together and what notes don't, you know, which kind of traps you in a weird way, because then all your shit starts to sort of sound the same, but I guess that's what makes you you, right? That's kind of roughly how I would put together a track.